On this Thursday night, the White House insists American bombs destroyed Iran's nuclear capability.
The world is a much safer place.
What the defense secretary would not reveal, what Iran's supreme leader is claiming, and the fears of what Iran is still capable of. A renewed push for a ceasefire deal to end the war in Gaza, what's being worked on, and when it could happen. Paving the way, the legislation allowing big infrastructure projects in Canada to get built faster becomes law. Plus, Denis Villeneuve.
You're Canadian?
A Canadian director's dream to have a license to thrill comes true.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Trump administration continues to make the case that Iran's nuclear capability has been obliterated. During a news conference today, the American Defense Secretary was combative when asked about a preliminary U.S. intelligence assessment that suggested the impact of last week's American bombing of Iranian nuclear sites may have been limited. The White House press secretary says that's flat out wrong.
When we look at the entirety of the intelligence that we have to this date, it concludes that these strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities were absolutely successful. It was a total obliteration.
In his first public comments since the ceasefire, Iran's supreme leader claimed victory. Ayatollah Khamenei claims the American bombs failed to achieve anything significant. Caught in the noise of those competing narratives are the questions of what Iran is still capable of and what it intends to do. Jackson Proskow has our top story tonight.
The United States decided to strike these two ventilation shafts.
From the Pentagon, a clearer picture of the U.S. strike on Iran's nuclear program.
President Trump directed the most complex and secretive military operation in history.
Officials say so-called bunker buster bombs, seen here in a test video, penetrated ventilation shafts at the Fordo facility, causing extensive destruction deep underground.
You want to call it destroyed, you want to call it defeated, you want to call it obliterated, choose your word.
A defensive defense secretary lashed out at the media for initially reporting the details of a leaked preliminary intelligence assessment, which suggested the possibility of less extensive damage that had merely delayed Iran's nuclear ambitions by weeks.
So let's take half-truths, spun information, leaked information, and then spin it. Spin it in every way we can.
But Secretary Pete Hegseth would not answer questions about what happened to Iran's stockpile of hundreds of kilograms of enriched uranium.
We're looking at all aspects of intelligence and making sure we have a sense of what was where.
European intelligence officials reportedly believe the uranium, fuel for a nuclear bomb, may have been removed before the strike.
There was no indication to the United States that any of that enriched uranium was moved prior to the strike.
From any of the sites?
Correct.
Iran's supreme leader said the U.S. gained no achievement through its bombing, while Iran's parliament voted to suspend cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, which wants independent inspectors on the ground. Experts warn any surviving uranium could help Iran get back to the brink of building a bomb, even with key facilities destroyed.
So if Iran has a stockpile of advanced centrifuges at an unknown site, that plus just a portion of its highly enriched uranium, it can move quickly back to that threshold status.
The White House insists the U.S. is now on a diplomatic path with Iran, with efforts underway to restart talks. But they say President Donald Trump is just as willing to use force again if negotiations fail. Donna?
Okay, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thanks. There is a renewed push to end the war in Gaza, which has dragged on for 20 months. President Trump said yesterday that great progress is being made on Gaza, and there are reports in Israeli media that in return for the U.S. bombing those Iranian nuclear sites, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu agreed to end the war in Gaza within 2 weeks. Mike Armstrong is in Tel Aviv tonight. Mike.
Well, Donna, according to reports just now coming out in the media here in Israel, the broad strokes of the deal would already have been agreed to. First, the fighting in Gaza would conclude within 2 weeks. The Israeli hostages would be released. Hamas leadership would be allowed to leave for other countries. And 4 Arab nations would move in to administer the strip, including Egypt and the UAE.
I think great progress is being made on Gaza.
Now, Donald Trump appeared to hint at something Wednesday at the NATO meeting in The Hague. Well, according to reports, the U.S. president is putting considerable pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. In fact, it would have been part of the reason Trump was so forceful in the early hours of the ceasefire with Iran. If the deal happens, there are other parts down the road. The Abraham Accords would be expanded, other Arab and Muslim countries would recognize Israel, and conditional on reforms to the Palestinian Authority, Israel would declare support for the two states concept. Since the October 7th attacks in 2023, there are estimates more than 56,000 Palestinians have died and 1 in 4 is at risk of starvation. There are reports of Hamas fighters seizing aid, and Israel this week cut off shipments to the north. A group of clan leaders in Gaza Thursday promised to protect distribution points, sites they say have become death traps. They also had an appeal to the U.S. president. He says he calls on the UN, the West, and Donald Trump personally. Trump, he says, stopped the war in Iran and should stop it in Gaza. That same appeal is coming from inside Israel as well. Families of hostages held rallies in Tel Aviv, again appealing to Trump. Now, Netanyahu posted on social media Thursday evening saying after the victory over Iran, there is an opportunity for a dramatic expansion of peace agreements. He doesn't mention the reports of a deal, but does say they're working hard on something. That said, there will be opposition in this country, including inside Netanyahu's coalition government. As for Hamas, there are reports in Arab media that a spokesperson says negotiations are progressing and that there should be indirect talks in the coming days. Donna?
Okay, Mike Armstrong in Tel Aviv. Thank you. Israeli settlers attacked a Palestinian village in the occupied West Bank, killing 3 Palestinians and injuring at least 7. Israeli security forces arrested 5 Israelis. Israel has built about 160 settlements since it occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem, land Palestinians want, along with Gaza, for a future state. The Israeli settlements are considered illegal under international law. There's now a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, but Canadians have been warned to avoid travel to the region because of the risks. About 800 Canadians have already left. Global Affairs Canada says more than 5,500 are registered in Iran. Canada severed diplomatic ties with Iran more than a decade ago. And as Taria Isri reports, that is adding another layer of difficulty for Canadians trying to get home.
The calm of this Canadian backyard is a stark contrast to the bomb shelters in Tehran.
Most of the time I was thinking that, okay, it's done, I'm gonna die.
This Iranian Canadian asked Global News not to identify her over fears speaking publicly could endanger her family as the regime launches its latest crackdown on dissidents.
With this war, it's getting worse and worse. People are scared and hopeless.
She returned to Canada Tuesday night, but left her new husband behind.
The hardest part was the point that he couldn't come in with me.
She had only traveled to Iran last month to get married, but the couple's celebration was short-lived.
First attack was on our wedding nights. I thought maybe it's from the AC.
She, her husband, and in-laws fled Tehran for the Turkish border, then traveled 20 hours by bus to the Canadian embassy in Ankara. But her relatives could not continue on with her since they don't have Canadian citizenship.
I went to the embassy, but there was no good answer for us.
Vancouver resident Satureh Sharieti is still in Tehran. She flew there for knee surgery after waiting months for treatment in BC.
I woke up to the news of the war having started. I was functionally immobile.
A near-internet blackout has made it hard to get in touch with consular officials. But the permanent resident has reached the Canadian embassy in Turkey.
They essentially told me that consular services are only available for citizens.
Dennis Horak was Canada's last envoy to Iran. Given the lack of diplomatic ties and the travel advisory to that country, he says Ottawa's options are limited.
People are worried and they want the government to swoop in and pull them out, and it's really not that easy.
and complicates feelings for the Iranian Canadians who managed to leave. Taria Isri, Global News, Montreal.
A Canadian citizen has died in Miami, Florida, while in the custody of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. ICE says 49-year-old Johnny Noviello, who was also a U.S. permanent resident, was found unresponsive on Monday afternoon and pronounced dead 40 minutes later. The agency says the cause of death is under investigation. He was detained by ICE in May and was being held pending removal proceedings in connection with a drug trafficking conviction in 2023. There's a new snapshot of the cost of living in Canada that finds earnings are actually increasing faster than inflation. Statistics Canada reports the average wage rose to nearly $1,300 a week in April. That's up 4.4% from a year earlier. By comparison, the Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, rose by 1.7% in April over last year. Prime Minister Mark Carney's sweeping legislation that allows the government to fast-track infrastructure projects has been passed by Canada's Senate, paving the way for Mark Carney to deliver on his campaign promise to build big and build bold. David Akin is in Ottawa. David, Bill C-5 has passed, but there were some concerns about it. What was the focus of the debate?
Well, Don, I'll tell you what, 12 of the Senate's 105 members are Indigenous. And it was that group of senators that really took center stage today, several of them arguing for a delay to C-5 because, in their view, the bill fails to guarantee Indigenous consent for those major infrastructure projects. Two former Mi'kmaq chiefs who were in the chamber, P.J. Prosper and Brian Francis, were among those making that point.
It comes along to being equal partners at the table. And that's all we've been saying. You're a former chief, I'm a former chief. We've been at the tables where, consultation was talked about, but it wasn't true, meaningful consultation. So I think going...
Now, Senator Patty Laboucaine-Benson, she's a Métis leader from Alberta, she argued in favor of the bill.
Now, at this pivotal and deeply uncertain moment for Canada, there's an opportunity for the government to achieve great things by acting honourably. And it's an opportunity for all of our leaders to come together, do the hard work of consultation and compromise, find common ground, and grow this country.
David, the point of this legislation is to get infrastructure projects built fast. So what happens now?
That's right. So the focus shifts back to Prime Minister Mark Carney and his cabinet. Premiers have given the cabinet a list of shovel-ready projects, and we have learned that the Prime Minister's office does indeed have about a dozen or more projects on its PONY list. PONY, in this case, standing for Projects of National Interest, PONY. And the plan is to announce most PONY projects all at once, knowing that some may well get blocked by activists, but knowing also as well that many, say a wind power farm or an interprovincial hydroelectric corridor, will get quick Indigenous and environmental approval and proceed right away to construction. Donna.
Okay. David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. The University of Toronto and Harvard University have agreed to allow some Harvard students to finish their program in Canada if they can't re-enter the U.S. because of visa restrictions. Students returning to Harvard Kennedy School will be able to take online and in-person courses at U of T's Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. U of T says the deal would not reduce the availability of spaces for other students. The Trump administration is attempting to revoke Harvard's ability to enroll international students over accusations of anti-Semitism and racism. Harvard has won a temporary injunction. Closing arguments at a closely watched trial. Coming up, the evidence the prosecution laid out against Sean Diddy Combs. Closing arguments began today in the criminal trial of Sean Diddy Combs. The music mogul and entrepreneur faces charges of sex trafficking, racketeering, conspiracy, and transportation to engage in prostitution. He's accused of using violence and fear to run a criminal enterprise, and he's pleaded not guilty. Neetu Garcha explains the case against him, and a warning: the story does include some disturbing details.
Prosecutors laid out nearly 5 hours of evidence accusing Sean Diddy Combs of using threats, violence, and drugs to force his partners into sex acts over multiple years and across several states. Assistant U.S. Attorney Christy Slavic told jurors Combs ran a criminal enterprise, saying he used his resources to recruit and transport sex workers for events referred to in court as so-called freak-offs. Slavic repeatedly telling jurors Combs and his inner circle wouldn't take no for an answer, using this video, a key piece of evidence, as an example.
My behavior on that video is inexcusable.
Though he later apologized, the court heard Combs bribed hotel security to prevent video of the 2016 assault of his former girlfriend Cassie Ventura from getting to law enforcement, which prosecutors said should leave no doubt he committed sex trafficking. They cited alleged threats, including withholding rent, leaking sex videos, or notifying family members as forms of control used by Combs, and that Ventura, as well as another accuser, Jane, were performing for him under duress. Combs has pleaded not guilty and maintains he's innocent.
These cases are very difficult to prosecute. Jurors love celebrities in the United States. They do very well at trial, whether it's civil or criminal.
This former federal prosecutor, who's not directly involved in the case, says the defense is set to deliver closing arguments Friday and is likely to focus on its argument the women were willing participants.
When you're talking about sex trafficking, it's challenging because consent is a defense.
Combs could face up to life in prison if a verdict isn't reached by the 4th of July holiday, when the courts will be closed. Experts say that may point to a hung or deadlocked jury on at least some of the counts. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
How about a vacation in North Korea? Ahead, how the secretive communist regime is making a tourism push. This video from China shows the moment a young girl was rescued from a storm drain. It's reported she'd been trapped there for 7 hours during intense flooding. It's one of several rescues being carried out across southwest China, where multiple cities are dealing with the aftermath of heavy rain. At least 6 people have died and more than 80,000 have been forced from their homes. Authorities in Ecuador have captured that country's most wanted fugitive more than a year after he escaped from prison. Jose Adolfo Macias, also known as Fito, leads one of Ecuador's most violent criminal organizations. It dominates the country's cocaine trade. The Ecuadorian military released footage of his arrest in the underground bunker where they say he was hiding. Fito's escape last January unleashed a wave of violence that led to a national state of emergency. He's now set to be extradited to the U.S., where he faces cocaine smuggling charges. We usually see North Korea's leader overseeing ballistic missile launches and military parades. This week, Kim Jong-un oversaw the opening of a tourist resort. He was joined by his wife and daughter as he toured the beach resort, which he hopes will boost North Korea's tourism industry. State media claims the resort can host up to 20,000 visitors. It claims to feature a beachfront water park and entertainment venues. It's set to open to domestic guests on July 1st. It's unclear when it will welcome foreigners. Heavily sanctioned for decades for its nuclear weapons program, North Korea is among the poorest countries in the world.
35,000 feet flying southwest over Newfoundland.
Amazon spies Canadian talent for its first Bond flick. Who they picked and why? Next. After 37 years, renowned fashion editor Anna Wintour is stepping down as editor-in-chief at American Vogue. The 75-year-old fashion powerhouse reportedly broke the news to her staff today. She will remain with Vogue as its global editorial director and continue in her role as Condé Nast's global chief content officer. With nearly $8 billion in box office receipts, James Bond is among the top 5 movie franchises of all time. Amazon bought the creative rights earlier this year, and this week it picked Canadian Denis Villeneuve to direct the next Bond movie. We don't know who will play the next Bond now that Daniel Craig has moved on, but as Redmond Shannon reports, this won't be the first time a Canadian has played a key role on the set of 007.
In the 4 years since the last Bond movie, there has been an MI6-like secrecy about what and who comes next.
We all have our secret.
But now some cover has been blown about the next 007. Or should that be 007? Denis Villeneuve will take charge of James Bond. the acclaimed Quebec director.
I understand.
Of movies like Dune,
Everyone is wired for what you're about to do.
Arrival, and Incendie.
Although he's been directing films abroad for the past 15 years, I think we feel a close connection to him.
Villeneuve will be joined on the Bond team by his partner in work and life, Canadian producer Tanya Lapointe.
I'm very curious to see how Denis Villeneuve's signature will adapt to the rhythm of the James Bond films.
In a statement, Villeneuve said, "I grew up watching James Bond films with my father. To me, he's sacred territory."
MI6 and James Bond are quintessentially British, but Villeneuve is far from the first Canadian to be part of the franchise.
You're Canadian? You work in Canadian intelligence?
Including founding producer Harry Saltzman.
You damaged my organization.
Bond villain actor Joseph Wiseman.
You never take me to dinner looking like this, James.
And Miss Moneypenny, Lois Maxwell.
35,000 feet, flying southwest over Newfoundland.
And it's widely believed Ian Fleming based Bond on Canadian spy William Stevenson. So who will portray him next? Even superfans are left guessing.
I think he knows who he's going to want to play Bond and what his kind of take on Bond is. I think a new Bond will be announced by the end of the summer.
With Villeneuve already committed to Dune 3, Bond 26 could yet be years away. Redmond Shannon Global News, London.
Hopefully not years. That is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada showcases Pictou, Nova Scotia, North Beach Provincial Park, Ontario, and Parkland County, Alberta. Please keep them coming. Send your pictures of Canadian pride to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.